This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Sri Lanka still in shock after a series of deadly nationwide bombings. Government says a local Islamist militant group planned the attacks with foreign support. The battle for Tripoli continues amid rising concerns about the US policy towards Libyan military strongman Khalifa Haftar. And vote counting set to begin in Egypt after 3 days of voting on constitutional referendum. Hello and thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe. Also with me in studio is Rama with a preview of what's ahead in business news.
Thank you very much, Peninah. Here's what's coming up a little later in the hour. The Angolan state oil company Sonangol has unveiled plans to downsize in order to focus on its core business. And the South African state utility Eskom gets part of the government's promised bailout, but well ahead of schedule. We'll explain why a little later on in the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Peninah.
Thank you, Rama. Let's start with the latest in Sri Lanka, where a nationwide emergency has been declared from midnight on Monday. The government will give its military sweeping powers to detain any suspect connected to Sunday's bombings. The country has declared April 23rd a national day of mourning. Meanwhile, one more explosion rocked an area outside a church in the capital on Monday. Earlier, we spoke to Associated Press reporter Sumisha Naidu from Colombo.
We're here near this church behind me, which was one of the churches that was attacked on Easter Sunday. And another bomb went off, causing chaos, absolute chaos here, because people didn't really know what was going on. I was with a group of people who dragged me into an alley. They were hysterical because they thought that there were more bombs, and the terror was really evident there. But then later on we found out that the bomb that went off was actually detonated by the police themselves. It was a parcel or some suspicious package or something in a van that had been parked somewhere over here for I think about 2 days, and their bomb squad had approached it and done something to safely detonate it, apparently. Although if you see footage of the actual detonation, it was quite a big explosion, and had it gone off under other circumstances, who knows what the injuries or casualties would have been like. But as of today, no one that we know of anyway has been injured.
Still in Sri Lanka, the government believes a local Islamist militant group is behind the deadly attacks on Sunday.
We don't see that only a small organization in this country can do all that. There is all, we are now investigating about the international support for them. And there are other links where they can produce, how they produce the suicide bombers here and all these things.
Sri Lankan officials failed to heed warnings from intelligence agencies about the threat of an attack by a domestic radical Muslim group. Authorities say little has been known about the group. Only its name appeared in intelligence reports. 290 were killed and more than 5,000 were injured in Sunday's bombings, which ripped through churches and hotels. A massive security operation has been launched to find those involved in the attacks. Local police say 24 suspects have been detained. 87 bomb detonators were also found at a Colombo bus station. The attacks are once again highlighting religious and ethnic tensions in Sri Lanka. The bombings have been described as the country's most challenging hour since its civil war ended 10 years ago. CGTN's Nayan Seth has more.
May 2009, the month which saw the 26-year civil war between the LTTE militants and the government come to an end. By then, the conflict had claimed over 100,000 lives. Peace returned to Sri Lanka, but tensions between major religious groups lingered. To understand the issue better, let's break down the country's religious demography. The island nation has a total population of around 22 million. According to a 2012 national census, more than 70% of them are Buddhists. 1 in 8 claims to be Hindu, while about 10% are Muslim. Christians account for just over 7%. Sri Lanka's constitution gives all citizens the freedom to adopt, practice, and teach any religion of their choice, but it gives Buddhism priority of the foremost place. However, U.S. State Department report in 2017 accused the country of not practicing the rights of minorities, a charge which was strongly denied by the Sri Lankan government. The report also documented around 100 incidents of attacks on churches, intimidating and violence against pastors that year. The nation has witnessed some sporadic violent incidents. In March of last year, a state of emergency was declared after clashes between the Buddhist community and Muslims in the city of Kandy, which killed 2 people. As the police zero in on the perpetrators of Sunday's blast, an entire nation remains on edge. With a history of sectarian violence, Sri Lanka is bracing itself for an uncertain future. With Nayan Seth and Yang Zhao for CGTN.
Egyptians are voting on political reform that gives President El-Sisi additional power and extends his terms in office. The focus has, however, shifted to the turnout to measure the support these changes have in Egypt. Izida Adel Makri with more.
3 days of voting on critical constitutional changes have been set to end on Monday. To most Egyptians, the results are not going to be a surprise. But turnout is crucial to reflect the magnitude of support this referendum has.
الدولة تستهدف وجود الناس أمام لجان.
A high turnout would have given an image to the international community that there is a popular legitimacy supporting the president to stay longer in office, that the president is responding to these calls for him to continue. His supporters are encouraging masses by all means in what appears to be organized voters' mobilization.
Outside polling stations, parties supporting the Egyptian president have used all methods to attract voters, from loud music to dancing at polling stations. Yet some polling stations in urban regions didn't appear so crowded.
To ensure that the third and final day of the vote would have a higher turnout, the Elections Committee has cancelled the evening break for judges who monitor ballot stations. The vote count has been scheduled for Monday night, and the results will be announced by April 27 at the most. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Zimbabweans are feeling the pinch as a wave of price increases rekindle bitter memories of hyperinflation. The price of bread almost doubled early this month, leaving many unable to afford the basic commodity. CGTN's Farimwa Kutuya reports from Harare.
Sugar, milk, and now bread have all gone up as inflation continues its upward surge, driven by a severe shortage of hard currency that's led to rate increases on the official and parallel markets. In March, year-on-year inflation rose to 66.8%, its highest level since 2008, piling more misery on hard-pressed citizens.
Children are now surviving on rice and sweet potatoes because no one can afford bread anymore. We are going back to a time when we would only eat bread at Christmas.
It's been 2 years since I last got a salary increase, yet prices are going up every day. I also can't afford not to go to work because then I'll be laid off and then my family will starve.
Government workers were awarded a 29% wage increase effective April, which they claim has already been wiped out by the latest wave of increases. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has accused businesses that are effecting the price hikes of being inhumane, unethical, and unpatriotic, but has not said what his government will do to address the situation.
His options are very limited because government don't have much to do in the economy. The only role of government to create an enabling environment for business to thrive, right? So if you look at President Mnangagwa in the Second Republic, if it was Mugabe, I would tell you that he was going to do price controls. But the Second Republic, if you are open for business, you can't do price controls.
Treasury says currency and fiscal reforms currently underway should lead the market to self-correct and expects inflation to start coming down to single-digit territory by end of year.
But with the cost of living already beyond the reach of many here, they hope this doesn't become a case of too little, too late. Farimwa Kutuya, CGTN, Harare. Zimbabwe.
Explosions and air raids have shaken Libya's capital Tripoli as rebel forces battle for control. The two-week offensive, led by the eastern-based Libyan National Army, has left more than 225 people dead and more than 1,000 wounded. The town of Ain Sarah has been damaged and the streets filled with rubble. Western powers and the Gulf have been divided over a push by Haftar's forces to seize Tripoli, undermining calls by the United Nations for a ceasefire. Despite the offensive, Haftar's Libyan National Army force has not been able to breach the southern defenses of forces allied to the internationally recognized administration based in the city. Let's now cross live to CGTN Guy Henderson, who is in Benghazi. Guy, what's the latest on the fighting there?
Well, after a few days of lull, the fighting has got pretty intense on the ground, mainly around those series of suburbs around the south of Tripoli. And as that fighting has escalated in the last 48 hours or so, the United Nations has started increasing the number of updates it's putting out on its social media feed about the civilian casualties and the effect that this is all having on civilians living in Tripoli. Just to give you an idea of how that impact has been felt over the course of the last week or so, last Monday, the United Nations was saying that 174 people have been injured and 18,000 people, which is already a significant number, had been displaced, mostly internally within Libya. Now, the latest figures we're getting about a week later, 254 dead, 32,000 people now displaced. That's 14,000 or so people who've been moved because of this fighting over the course of the past week or so. A lot more of them, and this is coming from the UN again, still trapped in Tripoli. Some of them have, been able to make their way part of the way out. Some of them are trapped completely, and those who have been moved by the UN aren't just being moved to camps within Libya and just outside the areas of the most intense fighting. The UN's now saying that it's moving some people to other countries, to places like Niger. There's also this sort of ongoing report get onto boats and take that dangerous journey to Europe as well. So that is the human cost at the moment, an escalation in fighting, the humanitarian situation on the ground getting worse as a result.
All right, Guy, I'm afraid we have to wrap it there. We've got some technical challenges with the line. Thank you very much for that update. Guy Henderson live in Benghazi. You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a break. Coming up. Chinese Navy sees big role to strengthen maritime cooperation as it marks its 70th anniversary. And Nigeria's Abuja-Kaduna Railway marks 1,000 days in operation.
Chirping of birds, sounds of whispering trees, burbling of streams. When sunlight sets the forest's leaves aglow, and waterfall surges down from the mountain, we see and hear the Earth's wondrous beauty. The Earth is meant to be appreciated, and the life of its inhabitants deserves our endless exploration. Come with CGTN to listen and see, in chorus of life, to marvel at nature and life.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Egypt's State Information Service, known as the SIS, has launched a website in Mandarin to serve the Chinese people living in Egypt. The network uses social and print media to reach out to followers around the world. CGTN's Yasser Hakim reports.
The SIS, or State Information Service, has an online website in several languages to provide all the information anyone needs to know about Egypt. It attracts millions of viewers worldwide.
الموقع بيتعدد إلى عدة أقسام The website is divided into many sections, providing information about Egypt and Africa, since we are the chair of the AU. You will find everything about Egypt, its location, its population, political system, political parties, and its tourist attractions. There is also a section about local press and prominent figures in politics, sports, art, science, and Egyptian who are excelling in all fields.
The online division is expanding further to cater to new followers. As part of the services provided by the SIS, they have launched a website in Mandarin to serve the Chinese people living in Egypt and abroad. Marwa Raghib is in charge of the Mandarin service and says it's a milestone for the SIS.
This is a result of the strong relations between China and Egypt. It is very important for us that the Chinese people know more about Egypt. Besides the daily news and information, we have a section on tourism, another on Chinese investments in Egypt, and a special section on science, researches, and educational topics, because there are many Chinese students studying in Egypt these days.
China has become so important that 2 Mandarin websites have been established in 2019.
One website is about Egypt, the second about Africa in Mandarin. It gives all the information about the continent, about the African Union, African history, politics and economics, all in Chinese.
The officials here hope the online service will build even more cultural bridges between the 2 historically friendly nations. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
China and Africa have deepened ties not only in trade and investment, but also in peace and security. Right now, about 100 young African military officials are in China for an official visit. CGTN's Beatrice Marshall tells us more.
Over the past decade, China's role in Africa's peace and security has rapidly grown with military cooperation and peacekeeping deployment. Through the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, or FOCAC, and the African Union's support, China has made a growing effort to take a pan-African approach to security on the continent. It is against this background that young African officers are visiting China, a follow-up to the implementation of the 2018 FOCAC Plan of Action, which calls for ongoing forums on peace, security and law enforcement between China and Africa.
Over the past years, we have seen tremendous effort being made by African leaders, as well as various partners, including China, in trying to promote peace as well as development in Africa. So the AU, in collaboration with China through the FOCAC initiative, is making great efforts to prepare for peace and prevent conflict in Africa.
China's contribution to Africa's peace and security has become more prominent with its presence in peacekeeping missions in places like South Sudan, DR Congo, Western Sahara, Liberia, Mali, Cote d'Ivoire and Darfur. Security cooperation efforts include maritime rescue, anti-piracy, medical and humanitarian support, and peace mediation. At the UN summit in 2015, President Xi Jinping pledged that China would provide $100 million worth of free military assistance to the African Union. This would be given over 5 years to support the establishment of an African standby force and enhance Africa's crisis response capacity.
China is probably the biggest contributor of troops of all the UN security members, and most of those peace officers are deployed in Africa. So that clearly shows the role that China is playing towards peace or contributing towards peace in Africa. So we are seeing China playing a major role in supporting the initiatives by the AU and African countries.
The visit by the young African officers is one sign of China's growing ties with Africa, not only in trade and investment, but also in peace and security, which is critical for the continent's development.
At the end of this seminar, we are going to learn more in terms of China-Africa partnership and what are the policies in terms of China-Africa partnership.
Security is an important chapter of the China-Africa story, and maintaining peace and security has become a pillar of the African Union. African officers from 45 countries currently visiting China is a true manifest of China's growing role in managing peace and security challenges on the African continent. The visit will also enable the African delegation make a further contribution to the China-Africa peace and security partnership. Beatrice Marshall, CGTN, Beijing, China.
The commander of China's Navy says he is focusing on cooperation and working with other countries. Vice Admiral Shen Jinlong spoke during the opening ceremony of the Navy's 70th anniversary, marking the start of 4 days of events. CGTN correspondent Han Bin has more from the celebration.
Well, there's an atmosphere of friendship as China's Navy marks its 70th birthday. It ranks as one of the biggest international gatherings for the Navy, with representatives from over 60 countries. Some have sent warships to the fleet review, some haven't. But the fact that those who haven't still come to observe is a clear signal of the PLA Navy's importance in maritime affairs. While the PLA Navy has shown itself to be more confident in transparency and more serious about playing a bigger role in dealing with the future challenges, the military relationship is a barometer of political ties. For example, the participation of both of the ASEAN navies in the review shows a relatively stable relationship between ASEAN and China in recent years. China has been working hard with ASEAN for the final stage of a code of conduct at sea, and this is to build a rule-based mechanism to resolve the disputes, which is no easy matter. While the strategic significance of the South China Sea has driven several rivalries, and the final agreements for lasting peace need open dialogues and effective mechanisms. Skepticism over China's naval growth has always been there and creating tensions on the sea. The Navy is trying to make its motives for building world-class force clearer to the foreign counterparts, and this multinational event will be a historic moment for the Navy to consider what kind of maritime orders it is building, what kind of role it is playing, and what actions it will take. Today's remarks by the top brass may reflect those changes in thinking. And with so much happening behind the scenes, the legacy of the 70th anniversary review might be seen for years to come. Han Bin, CGTN from Qingdao.
And in today's special series, Red Star Blue Water, we focus on the Naval Air Force. CGTN correspondent Han Bin was given re-access to a regiment in the eastern Chinese port of Qingdao, which will take part in the 70th anniversary parade. He spoke with pilots and technicians during rehearsals and got a first-hand look at how this new branch is transforming the Navy.
Before the pilot enters the cockpit, the ground crew have to finish their job.
我们做的这个工作啊，就是平常的直升机的维护和保养，把好每个细节关。如果我们出现哪怕一个螺钉脱落，或者是管路连接有泄漏的话，可能对飞机的整个操纵啊，还有起落都会有很大的危险的，属于一个幕后的工作。大家平时看到的就是飞行员在天上驾着飞机啊，起飞翱翔。 但是在背后啊，都是离不开我们的默默付出的。
It's been 10 years since Lin Binbin was assigned to this regiment. He says he has a special feeling towards the aircraft.
在我看来，我们这个直升机，更像是一把利剑，为舰艇的指挥啊，进行准确的引导打击。
Flight officer Liu Peng and his team are preparing for the big parade. What is not combat? It's not without danger.
优秀的飞行员，第一是身体素质，这是最基本；心理素质。编队啊是看的一个整体的效果，整体的一个通过的效果。一架飞机飞好了，不代表你这个整体的能力。这个是要求每一架飞机，然后这个要稳定，然后看好你的掌机，标好你的掌机啊，之后尽量的保持稳定。
Liu Peng has been flying Z9 helicopters since 2005. He can see the rising role of naval aviation through increasingly diversified missions. The Z9 is one of China's latest indigenous aircraft with advanced attack capabilities. The Navy has accelerated its modernization as required for offensive and defensive operations.
主要的视线是看好你的长机，盯好你的长机，然后通过你的副驾驶，通过你的战术指挥长来给你报一些数据啊，距离啊，这个高度啊，这个速度。
With the Navy going blue and the expansion of the carrier fleets, its air weaponry is also progressing.
在飞机上的话，我们这一款飞机的话，就更像是空中的一个轻骑兵，非常的机动，非常的灵活。海军航空兵的话，它主要是执行的一些海上的任务，随着舰艇到海上去巡逻呀，侦察呀、护航呀。随着军队的转型发展，现在的训练的强度、训练的难度比以往要大大的加强。特别是我这个新飞员分到我们单位之后，它的成长的周期大大的缩短。随着我们的海军不断的走向远洋。我们的舰艇，现在吨位越来越大，它都可以携带我们这款直升机去执行一些任务。所以说我们与其他的兵种的配合越来越多。
Historically, Chinese naval aviation has been land-based. Now it covers maritime patrol, anti-submarine operations, and logistical support. The aircraft carrier program and the escort missions have expanded its new dimension to missions further offshore.
Participating in the anniversary parade is another sign this new branch is taking center stage in the Navy.
虽然我们不能去现场吧，去接受检阅，但是我们的飞机啊能够正常的飞过去，安全平安的，这就是给我们最大的鼓励。
作为海军航空兵一名普通的飞行员，能参加这次70周年的海上阅兵活动，感觉到非常的荣幸，因为我们要在全国人民面前、全世界人民面前展现我们海军航空兵的一个风采。
If the sky is the limit, the Navy's Air Force is determined to challenge it. Harbin, CGTN, Qingdao.
In the next episode of our special series, Red Star Blue Water, we look at China's shipbuilding capacity. China has been building ships more rapidly than many other naval powers. We visit a leading shipbuilder for an inside look at the industry. Be sure to join us.
造船这一块体现出来的是综合的水平。中国能够有很多的类似的这种舰船下海，那折射出来的是整个中国的这个工业体系、工业制造的水平在逐步的提升。
From refitting and import to manufacturing and export, China's shipbuilding industry has surged.
In Nigeria, the Abuja-Kaduna railway line has just marked its 1,000th day in operation. Commencing in 2016, the train service has transported over 1.5 million passengers. It's part of China's Belt and Road Initiative in Nigeria to boost economic and social development.
The Abuja-Kaduna line has just celebrated its 1,000th day in operation. It's the first modern standard gauge railway, not just in Nigeria, but in West Africa. The 186-kilometer track links the capital, Abuja, with Kaduna, a transportation hub in northwestern Nigeria. Transporting an average of 4,000 passengers every day, the fastest train takes just under 2 hours.
It's very convenient, it's very comfortable, and it's safer than the road.
It's relatively cheap for almost all the passengers.
If the Chinese companies have the expertise, definitely we need to patronize them, and we hope that they build more like this.
1,000 days, this has brought improved economic activity to Nigeria. It has brought improved social interaction. Abuja Kaduna is an example of excellence for the Belt and Road project.
Part of the country's railway modernization, the construction project has created thousands of local jobs. Over 300 Nigerian personnel have been trained to operate the line. Built by the China Civil Engineering Construction Company, 75% of the construction was funded by China and 25% by Nigeria.
Through the implementation of these projects, it has gained high recognition from the Nigerian people and strengthened the bilateral relationship between China and Nigeria.
According to the Nigerian Railways Corporation, there have been no major accidents to date. As an affordable transportation option, a second-class ticket costs about $4 or 1,500 naira. 4 trains leave from Abuja almost daily, and frequency is expected to rise to meet soaring public demand. Asatal, CGTN.
Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Cairo Culture Center organized a Chinese Culture Day. Hundreds of primary and secondary school students learned about traditional Chinese culture. From kung fu performances to Chinese calligraphy, students participated in many activities. Children also got a chance to learn about contemporary China through a photo exhibition. Time now for business news, and for that we cross over to Rama.
Thank you very much, Peninah. Here's what's coming up in business. The Angolan state oil company Sonangol unveils plans to downsize in order to focus on its core business. And the South African state utility Eskom gets part of the government's promised bailout well ahead of schedule.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
6 years on, what is the state of the Belt and Road? And how is the progress?
Where are the challenges? Who is building, connecting, and benefiting?
Our global correspondents bring you personal insights, live business reports,
interviews with the major players, investigation and analysis.
For comprehensive coverage of the Belt and Road Forum, stay tuned to CGTN.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. Welcome back. Let's start in Angola. The country's state oil company Sonangol plans to sell off stakes in dozens of joint ventures and cut jobs in order to focus on its core mission, exploration. The oil giant so far has identified as many as 52 joint ventures from which it wants to get out of. The downsizing is part of an ongoing reorganization and a package of reforms designed by the company to lure back investors into Angola's oil sector. Oil accounts for 95% of exports, roughly 70% of total government revenues in Angola. The Southern African nation has been struggling in recent years to offset a steep decline in oil production. Further south, South Africa's government has had to bring forward the bailout, or at least part of that bailout, of the state-owned electricity firm Eskom. The state has rushed $355 million to the struggling utility earlier this month in order to avert a default, and it says more cash could be needed soon. The fact that the first tranche of this bailout, the total amount is something close to $1.6 billion, had to be brought forward does highlight just how precarious Eskom's financial position really is, and it's been exacerbated by spiraling diesel and maintenance costs. In February, the government promised Eskom a $1.6 billion bailout every year over the next 3 years, but it's only expected to start giving the cash to the utility between August and October of this year. Right, then after its landmark achievement of becoming the first African tech startup to list on the New York Stock Exchange. African in quotes, of course. Jumia has been answering some rather tough questions in Nigeria. There's an ongoing debate in that country as to whether or not Jumia is actually even an African company. Remember, it's incorporated in Germany. This arises from the fact that even though it operates right here in Africa, in 14 countries, Jumia has its headquarters and corporate base outside the continent. CGTN's Deji Badmus has more.
As Jumia continues to soak in the huge success of its listing on the New York Stock Exchange, it's having some explaining to do back home in Africa, especially Nigeria. Since the online retail firm listing as the first African tech startup on the New York Stock Exchange, many have been questioning if indeed Jumia is an African company. The tech firm was founded in Lagos, Nigeria, but it is incorporated in Germany, while its global headquarters is in Dubai and its technology center is in Portugal. The current key drivers of Jumia are French, who are co-founders of the company. This has prompted questions over whether indeed Jumia's feat could be celebrated as an achievement of an African startup. Not taking the issue lying low, the company assembled some of its top management staff in Lagos to address the subject.
Jumia operates in 14 African countries, and for you to operate, you have to be, legally registered in each country. So Jumia is an African company, which is why we use the term African. In terms of the ownership of the company, the largest investor in Jumia pre-listing is MTN, which is an African company.
Another big issue is why Jumia seemingly ignored the local bourse, the Nigerian stock market, in favor of the New York Stock Exchange. The company says it's basically for business reasons.
We spoke to a couple of investors when we were making this decision. And the second reason is that the NYSE is the largest stock exchange in the world. There are a lot of big technology players there, including Amazon, Google, and investors are quite familiar with the e-commerce business. So for these reasons, and the reasons include that also improves the perception of the company to allow us to acquire new customers, new vendors, is the reasons why it was a logical reason to go to NYSE.
Jumia says it is not completely ruling out the possibility of a secondary listing in any of the 14 countries where it currently operates, if and when the need arises. So there is a chance for local investors here who may be willing to take a bite of the pie. But don't forget, Jumia is not making profit yet. In fact, it lost $47.6 million in 2017. But on the flip side, the revenue has continued to grow every passing year. So that shows an attraction for some shrewd investors. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have granted Sudan $3 billion worth of aid. Now, the two countries will deposit $500 million with the Sudanese Central Bank, and then they will send the rest in the form of food, medicine and petroleum products as well. Now, this is the first major publicly announced assistance to Sudan from Gulf states in several years. Sudan has been suffering from a deepening economic crisis that has caused cash shortages and enormous queues at bakeries and petrol stations alike. Over the last few years, the Northeast African state's cash-strapped government expanded money supply. In short, they were basically printing money in order to cover the cost of expensive subsidies on fuel and wheat as well as pharmaceuticals. And all of that combined triggered annual inflation of over 70%. Further afield now, China's Financial Futures Exchange has, for the fourth time, relaxed restrictions on stocks index futures trading. That's aimed at meeting investors' risk hedging needs, and it should help introduce more long-term capital into the market. With the details, here's CGTN's Lily Liu.
Another step closer to the normalization of China's index futures trading rules. The Chinese Financial Futures Exchange has for the fourth time relaxed restrictions on stock index futures trading, which was tightened in 2015 after some abnormal fluctuations in the market. The new rules took effect today. According to the guidelines, transaction fees for closing intraday positions will be further cut to 0.0345%, and that is still higher than the level before 2015, but much lower than the ultra-high of 0.23% that took effect in September 2015. The margin ratio for small-cap CSI 500 index futures is now lowered to 12%, closer to the 10% level that's considered normal. This is while the margin ratio for the other two major indices, CSI 300 and SSE 50, have earlier been reset to 10%. In addition, intraday activity exceeding 500 lots on a single contract would be considered excessive, as opposed to 50 lots previously. The relaxation would meet the demand for most short-term speculative operations. The China Financial Futures Exchange said the rule change is aimed at meeting investors' risk hedging needs. The regulator also said it will help introduce more long-term capital into the market. Back in 2015, Chinese stock market suffered an almost 50% crash in nearly 2 months. Some blame the index futures trading for starting fire, as major players in the Wing-Wang market first sold short the indices all in a sudden, triggering panic in the stock market. Chinese regulators then put extremely strict rules on index futures trading, which had since then lost vitality. Analysts say the normalization of the rules will help investors better manage risks, foster a more liquid derivatives market, and promote the healthy development of the Chinese financial market. Lulu, CGTN.
Right, then let's get back to the business of unicorns for a moment. Shares in the online scrapbook company Pinterest surged by more than 28% on its first day of trading, effectively valuing it at about $16 billion. Its performance after its debut on the market signals increased investor appetite, both for risk but also for new tech listings. The shares opened at $23.75 to hit a high of $24.89 a share. Pinterest is a social scrapbooking site that allows users to search for various topics, and it said that its business is heavily dependent on advertising revenue. Pinterest's listing is regarded as an indicator of investor appetite for unicorns. That's basically in reference to private venture capital-backed companies with a valuation of more than $1 billion, and that covers everything from Uber, which is due to float next month, to companies like Jumia, which we spoke about a little earlier.
Well, we're seeing strong investor interest right here out of the gate. I think it says a lot about the investor belief in Pinterest, especially coming off of what we saw from Lyft, with the stock being down from its IPO price. I think investors like the Pinterest story and like the fact that their path to profitability seems to be a little bit clearer than some of the other IPOs this year.
I think when you start to see these unicorns come out and they start trading right away, the thing you have to understand is there's no trading history there. So if I'm talking to an investor or a trader who wants to go out there and try and get exposure to any of these names, one is understand that this is viewed as more of a speculative investment at first, because you really don't know what that stock's going to do. So you want to make sure you're comfortable putting a lot of the money you're putting out there to get access to that is going to be exposed to quite a bit of risk, I would say.
Finally, a quick run through some results here. Chinese tech giant Huawei has reported a 39% year-on-year increase in first quarter revenue. The world's largest telecoms equipment maker earned revenue of about $27 billion just for the first 3 months of 2019. Smartphone shipments also exceeded 59 million units. It's nearly 50% higher compared to last year's estimated 39 million units in sales. By the end of March, the firm had signed 40 commercial contracts for 5G networks with global leading carriers. This is the first time that Huawei has actually released a quarterly earnings report, as it continues to see growth despite continued political pressure, particularly from the United States. And we'll leave it there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. We'll be in Egypt at that time. The country there expects to borrow about $48 billion in the 2019-2020 fiscal year. Where's this money going to come from? At what cost? And what exactly will it do? We'll get you some answers live from Cairo at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, though, back to Peninah.
Thank you, Rama. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead. On World Earth Day, we shine a spotlight on Madagascar's delicate environmental ecosystem.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The world is commemorating Earth Day, but there's no good news coming out of some regions. Madagascar's delicate environmental ecosystem is diminishing by the day. Lemurs only exist naturally on the island of Madagascar. But if poaching and deforestation continue at the current rate, they may not exist at all.
Although Madagascar is the only home to the lemur,
The unique primate is being hunted by poachers, being deprived of the only home it has in the world.
Back then, we didn't know that it was bad to cut the wood, and we were earning 18,000 ariary, or €4.50 a day. That's a lot of money. We could buy about 40 kilos of rice with that much.
These log poachers threaten Madagascar's 9 million hectares of forests, which are shrinking each year by 50,000 and 100,000 hectares, further inflicted by the simple need by the public to cook using wood.
They come and put wedges underneath, and then with their knife, they remove the bark, and like that, all the way along. They actually clean the wood. Take a look at this one. It's ebony. The guys from the town of Tamatave who buy the wood from these poachers, they are buying it at 1,000 ariary apiece. Ebony or non-ebony, it gets sold 1,000 ariary, just like that.
The poachers cut down the trees surrounding the nests, which provide the lemurs with a means of flight. Out of 111 recorded lemur species, 105 face the threat of extinction, according to the Lemur Conservation Network.
They cut down all the trees, leaving only one in the middle. Then the lemur is trapped and has nowhere to go. The traffickers then shake the tree with the lemur in it, so it falls down and gets caught.
The battle to save the lemurs has soured the relationship between authorities and activists, creating fertile environment for the poachers' threat to inhabit the wild in the island of lemurs. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
South Africans have been urged to use less water as the country heads into winter. South Africa is ranked the 30th driest country in the world, with most of its rainfall occurring during summer. The Water and Sanitation Department has put measures in place to speed up infrastructure projects, but also reduce water supply. CGTN's Julie Shire reports from Johannesburg.
South Africans are being urged to cut down on their water use. Urban population growth, pollution and changing weather patterns are some of the biggest threats to water supply. Project and maintenance delays have added to the burden, putting infrastructure in jeopardy.
If projects are not finished on time, if money is not sufficient to be able to finish projects, then you end up with the projects not being completed, and therefore people who are supposed to be serviced not receiving the requisite services.
The Water and Sanitation Ministry recently announced changes to the way projects are managed. Allegations of financial mismanagement and corruption, which could run into billions of dollars, are also being investigated.
The report of the SIU will give us an indication of the scale as well as where particular actions need to happen. But also internally, there are processes that are underway. There are court cases.
The mismanagement of projects and maintenance backlogs are costing the country dearly. It's also threatening the quality of drinking water coming from the taps.
So when you start looking at issues of water being contaminated, it speaks to the fact that perhaps water isn't being monitored adequately as the department is required to do. I mean, what we do know is that the department hasn't indicated any evidence of monitoring since 2015.
Demand for water will outstrip supply by 2030. South Africa needs to tighten the taps on corruption as the country grapples with possible shortages in the next 10 years. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
To Cameroon, where a group of artists have found an innovative way of turning the intrusive water hyacinth into pieces of art. The weed, which covers most rivers in the West African country, has constantly cut off the locals from fishing areas. CGTN's Uche Okoronko has more.
Jean-Marie Unoke is working on his latest art piece at this art gallery in Cameroon's capital, Douala. Jean-Marie is one of the artists fighting against the invasive water hyacinth. He first dries the hyacinth, then sticks the dried weeds on his canvas, creating subjects that include landscapes and animal forms.
I
I work with water hyacinth because imagine if there was no paint to make oil paintings. If there was no paint, does that mean that we would have no other paintings besides oil paintings? So I specifically work with water hyacinth as a substitute to paint, so that people can also have access to other types of artworks besides oil paintings. I prefer working with water hyacinth rather than paint.
Jean-Marie's artwork sells for about $100 depending on the size and the complexity of his piece. Water hyacinth has led to the loss of marine life in many African countries.
Water hyacinth is harmful because it hides within the mangroves where the fish usually go to reproduce. So ever since this plant started appearing in the water, there are less fish. Now we have decided to harvest it, and it has become a very useful thing because when we harvest the water hyacinth and it's sorted, we use it to make manure, and the rest of it we use to make art pieces like bags and carpets.
The center also offers classes for people who want to learn how to create artwork from the water hyacinth.
I have come to learn how to use water hyacinth because water hyacinth is not a good plant. It chases the fish away, and that is why I have come to see how this plant can be used.
Environmentalists have for decades been pushing for more innovative ways of turning water hyacinth into art, furniture, or even green energy. For now, Jean-Marie and his fellow artists continue managing the spread of the weed by getting more and more people to make various hyacinth products for sale.
And coming up in sports, following their heroics in Singapore, we catch up with South Africa's national sevens team head coach Neil Powell.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The reigning World Sevens Series champion South Africa staged a remarkable comeback in the most recent leg of this series to beat Fiji 2019 to scoop the Singapore Sevens Main Cup. CGTN CS Duplessis caught up with coach Neil Powell and started by asking him how it felt to win the Singapore Sevens in the manner they did.
I think 19-0 down was probably a good reflection of what happened in the first half and how they dominated that first half because we gave them ball position. But going into that halftime huddle, you always need to be positive. I mean, you can't show defeat to the players, and I think the main message was, guys, we're still in it. If we can score first in the second half, then we can pull it back.
How much of your role is coaching, and how much of your role is man management?
If you asked me this question about a year or two ago with those experienced players we had, I would say 30% coaching, 70% management. But it's probably a little bit different now because we have so much inexperienced players. I think there was a lot more hard coaching done in the last 6 months or so to make sure that you get those inexperienced players on the same page as the rest of the guys.
2 to go. How important is it with the Olympic qualification round the corner to make sure you finish off strongly?
It's important, but not something that we need to focus on now. I think if we're going to shift our focus now to outcome and to the Olympic qualifier and the log standings, I think we're going to focus on the wrong things. I think we've been fairly successful in what we think is good with the squad that we have because we focus on the effort and the processes. And shifting our focus now and go, sheesh guys, we're only 14 points ahead of England. We need to make sure that we qualify. I think it won't be good for us.
How's the game of sevens evolved? From when you were a player to your coach now, you've seen this whole journey. How has sevens evolved for you?
yeah, it's faster. It's definitely more intense. It's a lot more physical than what it used to be. I know when I started as a player, we tried to avoid contact. Now you're almost looking for the contact, but it's definitely a lot more competitive. There's a lot more teams out there that can win a tournament on any day.
To football now, Senegalese striker Makete Diop is enjoying his second season at Beijing Rennes FC, one of a growing band of players